TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian. Welcome back, everybody, to TE Talks, sponsored by Through Eternity Tours. I am your host, Rob Allyn, and on TE Talks, we get to talk with some of the most fascinating people who make a living out of being wonderful storytellers. We get to delve into what drives them, what are they passionate about, and what they love to share with the clients that they take around. Today, I'm very excited because I haven't had such an opportunity to have a long discussion with our local PhD in Renaissance art, Robert, or Dr. Robert, I guess, but I'm going to call you Rob. How are you?
Rob. I'm fine, thank you. And you can just call me Rob.
Great. So today, we're going to be talking about the Renaissance, which is your specialty. And I am really excited about this because I feel terribly inadequate when it comes to the Renaissance. I think it's such a special time period. And I must say, after I watched your wonderful tour, virtual tour of the Raphael rooms, which I thought would be a perfect fit for you because your discourse was about Raphael. We could talk about that. But I once heard somebody give a reference to another guide that said that they made the Raphael rooms sing. And for me, you gave it a total concert. You kind of opened my eyes to how much of so many things on so many different levels. And really what I enjoyed the most was the joy of the Renaissance. I think you were able to communicate this just such a wonderful time period. I thought so many people would be listening to this would want to say, all right, let's get into a time machine and let's go there and see what this is all about. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Rob.
Sure.
Very nice of you to say that.
So tell me, what should we talk about in the aspects of, let's say, okay, the architecture of Rome in the Renaissance? What would you like to tell me about the architecture and how can we discover it? Like, what is the best places to go and see if you're looking for Renaissance architecture in Rome?
All right. Well, as the name indicates, Renaissance from the French, Rinascimento in Italian, means the period is a period of rebirth. Of course, this is a post-historical construction, although the Renaissance was in many ways kind of first self-conscious historical age at the time, because men like Giorgio Vasari, for example, who's the author of the Lives of the Illustrious Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, was published first in 1550. He seemed to understand that there was a rebirth going on in his age. Even though they didn't call it the Renaissance, of course. And so we're talking about a rebirth, and thus, what does that indicate? Well, a renewed vision looking at classical antiquity, particularly, the ancient Roman Empire. Also, to a certain degree, the classical Greek world, and in the arts and architecture, but not only in the arts and architecture, in humanistic scholarship, in theology, ancient design principles, learning, wisdom, however you want to call it, was all the rage in the 14 to 1500s in Rome and in Italy. And consequently, that rebirth was applied to the architecture of Rome as well. And I can say something about that as we proceed, but if the general characteristics of Renaissance architecture are borrowing from design principles from classical antiquity. And so the use of the classical orders, a theory of geometry and proportions to give the facades of buildings their rational appeal. And elegance that was thought connected to cosmological principles that were embedded in the mathematics behind the design themselves. Okay, that's what they thought in the Renaissance. And so balance, harmony, reason, order, these are the features of Renaissance architecture. And the places where you can see this in Rome, well, the greatest Renaissance building of Rome is the Tempietto, by Bramante on the Janiculum Hill.
Sure.
And that's right next to a church that was rebuilt around 1480, San Pietro in Montorio during the papacy of Sixtus IV, who also had Santa Maria del Popolo rebuilt, and Santa Maria della Pace, things that we'll be taking a look at as we proceed. And also built during Sixtus IV's papacy was Sant'Agostino.
Yes, these
In the
four great churches of
yeah,
the Renaissance.
in the Rione Ponte. But the Renaissance aspired to such such an ideal state that often things were never completely realized in the Renaissance. And then in the 17th century, the 1600s, we enter the Baroque age, and there's just an explosion in Rome of
Yes,
architecture and efflorescence in the arts. And what we were left with isn't so much a Renaissance city, but a Baroque city.
absolutely.
So I think that probably has led to you feeling that it's difficult to really get in touch with the Renaissance in Rome because it's present, but certainly not like the Baroque is.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so glad you pointed out many different things, a point of interest. I think it's a lovely thing that you described initially with Giorgio Vasari, that, we often refer to time periods, Baroque, Renaissance, medieval, but of course, people in those time periods really did not say, "Oh, I'm alive in the Renaissance." This is something that's
Right.
an idea that has been placed on by art historians and to define different time periods. But as you say, Giorgio Vasari understood that
Yeah.
he was alive at a
And,
very special moment.
and in many ways, our periodization of history is grounded in Renaissance historiography because,
Mhm.
it was in the Renaissance that they first started looking back at antiquity as an etas antiqua, an
Mhm.
ancient age. And then after that, um, the etas medio, the middle age. And
Mhm.
then they move into the modern period. And in many ways, the Renaissance is seen as the the launching platform for modernism, and for this reason, it's seen as a precursor to Enlightenment principles that only show up a couple of centuries later, really in the 18th century.
Sure.
Um, and this even connected to the architecture as I was describing it, but also the linear single point perspective schemes in Renaissance paintings, like in this beautiful ideal city in Urbino, done by now debated. Nobody knows for sure who did it.
Mhm.
The artist's identity is debated, but it's a beautiful image of this rational city design with a central circular planned church in the middle of the square, order, rationality. And so the Renaissance has been, in many ways, considered to be this period that, as I said, starts to bring us into modernity. Even
Mhm.
though, of course, that's not entirely true,
Sure.
because the Renaissance, while there were these rational principles at work.
Mhm.
It was still an age of mystical beliefs, beliefs in secret knowledge, an age of alchemy and astrology,
Mhm.
belief in magic, as in a kind of holy magic, magia naturalis, as it was described by the great Florentine Neoplatonist Marsilio Ficino, who
Mhm.
wrote an entire medical work about how you use magic to heal body and soul. So it's not as rational as we would like to
Mhm.
think of it.
No.
So yeah, and I actually have a couple of interesting stories that I can tell you about some of the quirkier aspects of the Renaissance in Rome, and you'll just see um, how guided by mystical beliefs, beliefs in the imminence of a new golden age that was going to prefigure the end times and the apocalypse, when we get the final struggle between good and evil, and the battle against Gog and Magog.
Mm.
And it was thought that the this Pastor Angelicus, the angelic pope, this is even a prophecy in Rome that I can tell you about, was going to come and defeat the Antichrist. And this is showing up in the arts. For example, Luca Signorelli's famous preaching of the Antichrist fresco in the San Brizio Chapel in the Duomo of Orvieto, beautiful medieval hill town in Umbria, then part of the Papal States, from about 1499, 1502. So there's a lot of superstition. There were a lot of irrational aspects of the Renaissance, and I kind of find that really exciting.
I agree with you. It's an interesting juxtaposition that you point out, because you established, right? You said that the thing with Renaissance architecture is that it has this sort of, if we could use an adjective, rationalism. It's rational architecture, but here you are juxtaposing with saying that people had different things that we would look at today as irrational beliefs. Now, before we can go into these fascinating stories that you want to bring up, just that you brought up these churches that I really enjoyed studying, when you and I both studied together to become the official guides that we are today, we had to do those churches of Sixtus IV, Piazza del Popolo, Sant'Agostino, Santa Maria della Pace, and San Pietro Montorio. Now, do they still have their Renaissance facades, in your opinion, or are any of them still Renaissance, or do they have Baroque added onto them or changed completely?
Sure. The Santa Maria del Popolo has some Baroque buttresses on the ends of the upper facade. They were added in the 1600s, but no, Santa Maria, San Agostino rather, and San Pietro Montorio still have the original Renaissance 15th century facades, whereas Santa Maria della Pace's exterior was completely redone by Pietro da Cortona in the 1660s for Pope Alexander VII Chigi. So it's this great theatrical Baroque facade, and no longer the Renaissance one. But yeah, so that's what we have.
Perfect. I remember also Sant'Agostino was special because of this facade was the first kind of facade where the what is the word? It wasn't the artist himself. It was the man who commissioned it was putting his own.
Yeah. Guillaume d'Estouville, who was the Cardinal Bishop of Ostia, he was a French
the patron
cardinal. Yeah, the patron under Pope Sixtus IV.
Of course,
the builder of the Sistine Chapel. Yes.
Okay, well, so now we have an idea, and I would imagine you would say, or correct me if I'm wrong, when you describe that, because the Renaissance did not start in Rome, but because of Rome being what Rome is even today, obviously people who are interested in the classics want to come to Rome to study the architecture here, correct?
Sure. Yes.
Well, great. So let's talk about this, because you mentioned that you have fascinating kind of anecdotes to support what you're talking about with this kind of rational belief, or not even irrational, but this kind of belief in mysticism, and how does it apply to the city of Rome at that time and to the Renaissance architecture that we can see today?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the ironies of history and these quirky tales that in my dissertation that I wrote for KU Leuven in Belgium, some of this stuff really sparked my interpretations of some of the artworks that I put into my dissertation. So yeah, we have from according to the Epistola Enoch of Ludovico Lazzarelli, who was a disciple of Marsilio Ficino, the great Florentine Neoplatonist, but in this case, he was a student of alchemy under a certain Giovanni Mercurio da Correggio. And again, according to his Epistola Enoch, on Palm Sunday, 1484, Giovanni Mercurio da Correggio, mounted on a black steed, dressed with a white tunic, so he looked like a surrogate Jesus Christ during the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, wearing a crown of thorns and a tau cross.
Wow. Okay.
Marched through the labyrinthine streets of the quarters of Rome, through the Campus Martius, crossed Ponte Sant'Angelo, entered the Borgo Leonina, and made his way to Old St. Peter's Basilica, where he gave this fire and brimstone sermon
Mm.
announcing the great conjunction that was to inaugurate a new golden age under the sign of Hermes Trismegistus, who the Renaissance believed was this magus Egyptian hierophant priest from the times of Moses. And it goes to show you the extraordinary fortune that these Hermetic doctrines had after Marsilio Ficino, again in Florence, translated the Hermetic corpus, the Corpus Hermeticum, and had it published Treviso in 1471. So anyway, and then if you go to Sienna's Duomo, the cathedral, on the Intarsia floor, right when you walk in the door, is this huge image of no less than this pagan wizard, Hermes Trismegistus, who, because an early church father from the time of Constantine, Lactantius, in his divine institutions, praised as having been the first to teach the doctrine of the Trinity, and that had been a secret prophet of Jesus Christ, made Hermes a kind of holy figure in the church at the time. So that's one quirky story, and it ties into this idea of the Renaissance as the culmination of the medieval expectations for a new golden age before the apocalypse, before the end times, before the last judgment.
Can I ask you about that?
Sure.
Just, sorry to interrupt you, because I know that you also mentioned Hermes. I have to see his name right now before I could. I don't want to butcher the whole name out, but that
Trismegistus. It means the thrice great Hermes.
Okay, Trismegistus, great. You mentioned him also in your tour, the Raphael rooms. Where did you discover him? Is he, I mean, in those who have in-depth knowledge of Renaissance, is he like one of these master figures that everyone knows about? Or was it somebody that you kind of just discovered and took a great interest in him and this story and kind of used this for a basis for your doctorate? I mean, where did you find out about him?
Well, I know about the image of Hermes Trismegistus on the floor of Sienna's Duomo, and I knew about Marsilio Ficino having been asked by Cosimo the Elder de' Medici to translate the Hermetic corpus after the manuscripts were brought back from Macedonia by a certain Leonardo da Pistoia. And this was even before Ficino did his translation of Plato. So I knew that he was in the Hermetic doctrines, or at least Ficino's brand of Hermeticism, just like Ficino's Christian brand of Neoplatonism, was as a kind of core of intellectualism for a few decades in the late 1400s and the early 1500s, that I, in my research, I believe was able to show it connects with the intellectual sort of foundation of a number of artworks that I talk about. Hermes was thought to have been the inventor of alchemy and astrology, taught the Egyptian priests this, and so he shows up probably in the Borgia apartments twice, not once but twice, the apartments of Pope Alexander VI Borgia, in a hall with the 7 planets of their cosmology and therefore their astrology. You see Hermes teaching his priests astrology with an armillary sphere above them. And then the myth of Hermes who slays Argus, the all-seeing servant of Juno, who was minding the gadfly, the Io the heifer. And Cicero, in his On the Nature of the Gods, said that after Hermes slayed Argus and liberated Io, went to Egypt, where they worshipped him as the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus. So, that got me interested. He's showing up in these Renaissance artworks.
Interesting. Now, you also mentioned, just for our listeners, and you've listened to our other episodes, what I always like to do when we have the moment to be able to do it, we take all of these people that we bring up, or these paintings or pieces of architecture, and we find the images and we place them in the Zoom video that will be going up on our YouTube channel. Now, having said that, and you've seen some of the other ones that you asked me specifically, which I thought was really interesting, is that you said, okay, I have a series of a few images that you want to refer to and help them along with what your stories are. So why don't we talk about some of those things and some of the other stories you wanted to?
Great. Yeah, there's another story I wanted to bring up in light of these quirky aspects of the Renaissance.
Sure.
And that's the new apocalypse of the Franciscan Joe Menez da Silva, who was alias Amadeus, Blessed Amadeus, and he was a friend of the Franciscan Pope Sixtus IV, builder of the Sistine Chapel, and Sixtus's
Okay.
personal confessor. And so in 1482, sometime before Easter, he was a friar at the Montorio site on the Janiculum Hill where Bramante's Tempietto was built.
Mm.
And he claimed that he would go to pray and fast in a cavern right there on the Janiculum Hill. And then while he was praying, he was abducted by the Archangel Gabriel and transported to the high firmament of heaven itself, where he was before Christ and the Virgin Mary and all the blessed. And he was revealed by Gabriel, so he claimed, this apocalypsis nova, the new apocalypse. And it was explained to him by the archangel all the secrets of the scriptures. And the basic idea was that the written law of Moses was carried through into the written law, the evangelical law of Jesus Christ. Which is interesting, of course, for the wall paintings of the Sistine Chapel at this time, because that's what they show with their titular inscriptions that clearly nail down the typological intention of the program. But anyway, so it's just one of these bizarre stories. And he wrote a book, an account of this new apocalypse that also predicted the Pastor Angelicus, the angelic pope, who was going to defeat the Antichrist and initiate a golden age before the apocalypse. And every pope from that time forward, from Alexander VI down to Leo X de' Medici, thought that they were the prophetic Pastor Angelicus, the angelic pope. And so this Catalan painter, Pedro Fernandez, comes to Rome during Pope Julius II's papacy and is in the workshop of Raphael. And he paints the vision of Amadeus, which is in the Barberini Gallery in Rome. And it's this huge painting, and it shows Amadeus in front of the Archangel Gabriel and looking at the court of high heaven. And high heaven, the court that the blessed are seated upon, is based on Bramante's Tempietto. So it seems as if they thought at the time that where he had this vision was the cavern underneath where the Tempietto was subsequently erected.
Fascinating. You know what's very interesting also is I remember on the Janiculum Hill there was those such a pain to study for sometimes. I mean, back in ancient Rome, they had a lot of series of these strange cults that were worshiping on the Janiculum Hill at the base. I guess where the there's a villa there that's not dedicated, it's to a family, not Scacchi. No, not Scacchi. You know where there's that courtyard?
The Villa Sciara?
Sciara. There you go. Thank you. Exactly. Villa Sciara. There were these strange cults. I just find that interesting how there are these correlations. And
so get this, Rob. Amadeus then gave his book to the Venetian Cardinal Domenico Grimani and the Iberian Cardinal Bernardino Carjaval. And they kept it secret. And it was only opened at the beginning of the 1500s because everybody was afraid to open it because it had this prophecy of the end times. And the astrologer and humanist, French astrologer and humanist, into the Counter-Reformation period of the 1500s, when he was in Rome, said that every cardinal had a copy of Amadeus's New Apocalypse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Every cardinal.
Yeah.
Handwritten copy. This is amazing to me. I've always enjoyed the fact that you have these very specific details because everyone kind of knows these famous anecdotes that we as guides talk about, but this one specifically I've never heard of before. And that's what I always love about what you do is because you kind of paint a picture. You paint a picture of high intellectual figures in Rome, internationally, all over the city here. When we,
well, yeah, and it just goes to show you how batshit crazy the Renaissance could actually be, and that's not told enough.
Yeah,
so that's what I'm here to do. No, I'd like to talk a little bit about the city, in the Renaissance.
Great.
The end of the Middle Ages was terrible for Rome. First with the so-called Babylonian captivity of the papacy in Avignon, moved there 1309, and then the papacy comes back in 1378, but that only triggers this horrific Great Schism.
Sure.
During which it lasts until 1417. So there are two and then eventually three popes being elected. The Catholic Church is being torn apart, it seems.
Mhm.
Rome is overwhelmed by the baron wolves, the noble families that are fighting for control of the city.
Sure.
Brigands are both inside the city walls and outside in the countryside. It's not safe to travel.
Mhm.
And at the time, in this Florentine poet Fazio degli Uberti wrote something called the Dittamondo that was about these dire times. And there's a beautiful anonymous illuminated manuscript that shows Rome as a widow, wearing
Wow.
black by the Colosseum, and she's bereft of both her two masters, Pope and Emperor, ancient Roman Emperor and the Pope. So this was something that was really felt at the time. Now, the late medieval city was divided up into its rioni, which were initially 13, and then by the end of the 15th century, the Borgo Leonina was added, the Vatican court,
Sure.
to make them 14. And uh, yeah, so they were loosely based on the Augustan age division, Caesar Augustus's division of Rome into 14 regiones. Intrinsically, but of course, they did not coincide with the boundaries of the ancient regiones. No. And so the city was divided up between these rioni, and also was, of course, the population was greatly depleted in the Middle Ages, and even worse because of the Avignon period, the Great Schism.
Sure.
And so we had a habitat, the abitato, where people were living basically along both sides of the river, in the Campus Martius,
main water,
in Trastevere, and in the Borgo Leonina, with just a few bridges connecting, not as many bridges, of course, as we have today.
No.
And then the rest of the city, especially up on the hills, was kind of like, an urban wasteland, a rural countryside in the city, where we just had some ruins, important churches like the Lateran, and vineyards and orchards that were owned by the church and worked by monks. So that was the disabitato. Toward the end of the Great Schism, and we move into the times of the Venetian Pope Gregory the 12th, 1406 to 1415, and he has to get out of Rome when the troops of King Ladislaus of Naples sack Rome brutally starting on the 8th of June 1413. And that was the first time Rome was sacked. The next time would be in 1527, the Great Sack of 1527. But Rome was burnt, the churches were pillaged, its archives destroyed, the ancient buildings had already been devastated previously in the earthquake of 1349. Now the unpaved streets were in a state of horrible decline, with excrement and detritus all over the place. There was no communal governance or public administration, so it was evident that Rome could not emerge from the state of anarchy so long as there was no strong hand to assume responsibility. And of course, that strong hand would have to be the papacy coming back to Rome. And it eventually does come back when Odo Colonna is elected at the Ecumenical Council of Constance in 1417, and he's able to finally come back to Rome in 1420. And this is when the Renaissance really begins in Rome, when the papacy comes back.
Great. Good to know my information's spot on with that. I always talk about Martin V.
So this begins the project of the Renovatio Urbis, as the papal court called it at the time. Literally the renovation of the city in a sense of a renewal of Rome.
Sure.
And the papal ideology at the time wanted to see themselves as legitimate successors of the ancient Roman emperors, the Caesars, and the Catholic Church is the only institution from the Roman Empire that had survived, that had taken upon itself its universal mission. And so Rome was this basically reduced to a village, and one that was in a dreadful state, with only about 17,000 residents when Martin V comes back in 1420. So immediately the Pope and the cardinals begin to ask artists, a number of whom were Florentines, because that's where the leading innovations were being made at this time, to Rome to make the city more beautiful. And so we get Masolino da Panicale, paints in the Branda Chapel in San Clemente.
Sure.
Gentile da Fabriano does a fresco cycle. Unfortunately, it has since been destroyed at St. John Lateran's Basilica. And it was also a time of humanism and humanists coming to Rome already, even before the papacy got back. Some Florentine humanists were here, like Paul Gio Bracciolini, who went to the Council of Constance and somewhere in the Holy Roman Empire. Nobody knows for sure. He was a book detective, a great book detective. And he found this lost poem of the Roman poet Lucretius, who wrote it about 50 BC, called De Rerum Natura, On the Nature of Things. And it was incredible because basically it was an atheistic work, for one thing. Can you imagine somebody from the papal court bringing back an atheistic work from antiquity? One that was based on Epicureanism and taught this atomic theory. The earliest example of atomic theory that we had said that everything is made of atoms. That there aren't really any gods, and atoms are just colliding irregularly all the time and randomly, and they just sort of make matter. And then when matter breaks down, when you die, all those atoms just go back into the universe, and that's it. And what's interesting about this is that the poem opens with a hymn to Venus, which sort of goes against the premise of not believing the gods, but we won't worry about that. But this is just the opening of Lucretius's poem. It's beautiful. This prayer to Venus, the light of humankind and gods above, parent of Rome, propitious queen of love, whose vital power air, earth, and sea supplies, and breeds whate'er is born beneath the rolling skies. For every kind, by the prolific might, springs and beholds the regions of the light. Thee, goddess, thee the clouds and tempests fear, and at thy pleasing presence disappear. For thee the land in fragrant flowers is dressed, for thee the ocean smiles and smooths her wavy breast, and heaven itself with more serene and pure light is blessed. Now, it's been argued that this opening to Lucretius's On the Nature of Things was one of the inspirations to one of the most famous paintings of the Italian Renaissance. I'm talking about Botticelli's La Primavera, that was made for the Medici household. It's a beautiful painting. It's now in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence and dates to about 1480. So anyway, Paul Gio Bracciolini brought that work back to Rome from the Council of Constance. Yeah. Oh, and what was the city like? What was the city that Giovanni Mercurio da Correggio on a black horse as a surrogate Jesus Christ announcing a new golden age? What was that city like that he walked through? Okay, well, it's not the city that we have today, right?
Thank you for joining this Through Eternity podcast, TE Talks with Guides, episode 5 with Rob Allyn and Robert Huber talking about the Renaissance. This is a 2-part episode, so please join us for part 2, where Robert talks about what the city of Rome was truly like during the Renaissance.
Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.